They called him Old Blood and Guts. To his men, he was the kind of general who turned ordinary soldiers into legends. To his enemies, he was the one man they prayed never to face. Even Adolf Hitler himself admitted that no Allied commander was more dangerous. But Patton wasn't just feared on the battlefield. He was feared everywhere, because no one ever knew what he would do next. George S. Patton wasn't built like other generals. He didn't care about politics. He didn't care about playing it safe. And he definitely didn't care about being polite. He cared about winning, no matter the cost. Some saw him as a genius. Others thought he was insane. But there's one fact nobody could deny. He was the most feared general of World War II. When the United States entered World War II in 1941, the Army was a mess. America had been out of major wars for decades. Training was outdated, weapons were old, and discipline was loose. The German Wehrmacht had been crushing Europe for years with blitzkrieg tactics, fast-moving tanks, coordinated air support, and ruthless soldiers. America needed someone who could not only fight the Germans, but fight like them, only harder, faster, and with more aggression. That's where George S. Patton came in. Patton was born in 1885 in California, into a family that bragged about its Confederate ancestors. From the start, he was obsessed with war. As a child, he read about Caesar, Napoleon, and Hannibal instead of fairy tales. He believed he was destined to be a warrior, even claiming he had lived past lives as a soldier in ancient battles. This belief gave him an edge. He thought he was chosen, and that confidence was contagious. At West Point, he stood out, not for academics, but for sheer toughness. Later, during World War I, he became one of America's very first tank officers. Patton didn't just command tanks. He fought in them, leading from the front, showing his men he wasn't afraid to bleed. He was shot in the leg in 1918, but instead of crying out, he urged his men forward. That set the tone for his entire career: relentless, fearless, and uncompromising. By the time World War II rolled around, Patton had turned himself into a living symbol of aggression. He wore polished helmets, shiny boots, and carried 2 ivory-handled pistols. He gave fiery speeches, full of curses, threats, and raw energy. One of his most famous speeches before D-Day summed it up. No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making the other poor bastard die for his. To his men, this was electrifying. They joked that our blood, his guts, was the real meaning of his nickname. They sometimes hated his harshness. He punished cowards, pushed them past exhaustion, and even slapped soldiers suffering from battle fatigue, calling them weak. But they also loved him because his methods worked. Under Patton, units that were once sloppy and scared turned into fierce, disciplined fighters. In 1942, America faced its first real test in North Africa. The Germans, led by the legendary Erwin Rommel, had been tearing apart British and Allied forces with their desert warfare. When U.S. troops first met Rommel's Africa Corps, they were humiliated. Poorly trained American divisions were crushed at battles like Kasserine Pass. Eisenhower knew things had to change. He brought in Patton. Patton immediately whipped the U.S. Second Corps into shape. He demanded spotless uniforms, strict discipline, and endless training. Soldiers hated him at first, but within weeks, he transformed them. When the Americans met Rommel again at El Gueter in March 1943, it was different. Patton's tanks and artillery crushed the Germans, forcing them to retreat. Patton later bragged that he had read Rommel's own book on tank tactics, studying him like a chess opponent. "Rommel, you magnificent bastard," he supposedly said, "I read your book." For the first time, the Germans realized the Americans weren't amateurs anymore, and the man leading them, Patton, was dangerous. Patton's fame exploded during the invasion of Sicily in July 1943. Originally, British General Bernard Montgomery was supposed to take the glory. Patton was ordered to protect Montgomery's flank. But Patton wasn't built to sit on the sidelines. He launched his own offensive, racing his troops across mountains and towns with unbelievable speed. He captured Palermo, then beat Montgomery in a race to Messina, the key city. In just weeks, he had swept across Sicily so fast the Germans barely had time to respond. Patton's aggression humiliated the Germans, but it also embarrassed Montgomery. Tensions between the two generals nearly tore the Allies apart, and then came Patton's darkest moment. While visiting field hospitals, he slapped two soldiers suffering from what we now call PTSD. He called them cowards and ordered them back to the front. News leaked to the press, and the scandal almost destroyed him. Eisenhower had to remove him from command temporarily. Many thought his career was over, but Patton was too valuable to lose. The Allies would need him again soon. Here's the crazy part. Patton was so feared that his very name was a weapon. Before D-Day in 1944, the Allies set up a massive deception called Operation Fortitude. They built fake tanks, fake camps, fake radios, all designed to convince Hitler that the main invasion would come at Calais, not Normandy. Who did they put in charge of this ghost army? Patton. Why? Because Hitler was convinced Patton was the Allies' best general. Even after the Normandy landings began, Hitler refused to believe it was real. He held back divisions waiting for Patton to strike. That delay gave the Allies precious time to build their beachhead. Think about that. Patton didn't even have to fire a shot. His reputation alone won battles. In July 1944, Patton was finally unleashed. He took command of the U.S. Third Army and tore across France. His tanks smashed through German defenses in Operation Cobra, breaking the stalemate in Normandy. Then came one of the most breathtaking advances in modern warfare. Patton's army covered 600 miles in just 2 weeks, liberating towns and villages one after another. His men moved so fast that supply lines couldn't keep up. At times, his tanks ran out of fuel just miles from finishing off trapped German armies. The Germans were stunned. They called him the fastest, most dangerous commander on the Western Front. December 1944. Hitler launched his last desperate gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. German forces smashed through the Ardennes, surrounding American units in the freezing town of Bastogne. If Bastogne fell, the entire Allied front could collapse. Eisenhower turned to Patton. Could he move his army north to rescue the trapped soldiers? Most generals would have said no. It would take weeks to reposition an entire army. Patton said he could do it in 2 days. In one of the most incredible maneuvers of the war, Patton pivoted his Third Army, marched through snow and ice, and smashed into German lines, relieving Bastogne just in time. His counterattack broke Hitler's offensive and sealed the fate of the Nazi regime. That was Patton at his absolute peak. Fast, ruthless, unstoppable. But here's the thing. Patton wasn't only feared by the Germans. His own allies feared him too. Eisenhower admired his brilliance but constantly worried about his mouth. Patton insulted allies, made outrageous comments, and even suggested after the war that America should fight the Soviets next. He once said, "We defeated the wrong enemy." To many, that sounded like treason. To Patton, it was just honesty. He believed the Soviet Union would be America's next great threat, and he wasn't afraid to say it out loud. In December 1945, months after the war, Patton was injured in a car accident in Germany. He died just 12 days later. Some believe it was just bad luck. Others whisper it wasn't an accident at all, that maybe he was silenced because his views about fighting Russia made him too dangerous. Whatever the truth, Patton left behind a legacy unlike any other. He wasn't just a general. He was a force of nature. soldiers followed him, enemies feared him, and allies never quite knew what he would do next. George S. Patton was more than old blood and guts. He was the embodiment of fear, both for his enemies and for his friends. He could be reckless, brutal, and offensive, but he was also brilliant, decisive, and relentless. The Germans feared his tanks. The Allies feared his mouth. And history still remembers him as the general who made war move faster than anyone thought possible. Subscribe for more untold stories of history's most feared leaders.